very first Sunday I said to the church, we're going to start Alpha. One person came, but that person wasn't a Christian. I mean, very open, but skeptical. I think it was the second term he did it again. And when we got to the week on healing, I had a word of knowledge for somebody who'd had eczema as a child, and then it had recently come back. And James said, "That's me." And we prayed for him. In the moment, nothing particular happened. But he said that next morning when he was taking a shower, he looked down and he realized all the eczema had gone.
Welcome, everybody. This is Simon Gilbo with Inspired. Great to have another fantastic week of encouragement and hearing great stories of what God is doing in another wonderful guest. Listen, if you're new to us, I think most of us, we're really just fed up and drained by being relentlessly bombarded by negativity in the press. It just induces fear and anxiety and cynicism and depression, and so enough of that. And that's why Inspired is just such a joy to be a part of, because we hear of what God is doing around the world through different friends of mine. And this week I've got no doubt you're going to be inspired, because we got with us the wonderful Archie Coates. Welcome, Archie.
Hi Simon, delighted to be with you.
Fantastic to have you. I've been looking forward to this. So Archie, for a bit of context, took over from Nicky Gumbel about 3 years ago as leader of Holy Trinity Brompton, which many people will know, but some people might not know. That's a huge responsibility with a massively expanding network of church planting, the humongous impact through Alpha across the nations, and a whole lot more. Now, I was a junior leader, 19, 20, 21 years old, at a Scripture Union camp at Swanage with Archie's mum, Judy, who cooked us all the food. Judy, I'd love it. She's 89 years old now. I'd love it to be listening. Just shout out to Judy, the old legend. And thank you for all those fantastic meals that you kept us on the road in those incredibly full-on energetic days on youth camps. And then Archie and I overlapped just a little bit at St. James Les Pimlico. Those were amazing days when it was just absolutely rammed with young people passionate for Jesus. And it's so interesting years later to see what a whole number of those people have ended up doing. Anyway, pretty much as I arrived, you then headed off. And so I just love, Archie, a bit of context in terms of your early life and what shaped you there.
I was brought up in a Christian home, and I've never not gone to church or been a churchgoer. Always had a faith of some sort. But I guess, one doesn't just only want to adopt the faith because of one's parents. You want to find one's own way. For me, it was a very significant moment. And I remember the day because it's my birthday, actually, when I was 15. And somebody prayed for me to be filled with the Holy Spirit. And I think I had the Holy Spirit in me already, but it was a special encounter. And I remember weeping. It was on a youth camp, but it was a happy weeping. But I didn't really know what was happening at the time. But if I just say that before then I was a teenager, and I would have probably characterized myself as being quite a shy, unconfident. I don't think I'd really, like a lot of teenagers, I don't think I'd really found myself and kind of who I was. But after that, I noticed I began to change. I began to kind of, first of all, know who I was. And it was my identity, but it was because I realized now I was in Jesus Christ. But then everything that flowed from that, I found a confidence. I found that I was easier with people, less socially awkward. And I don't think I knew that was what was happening as I was being prayed for. But as I look back, it was a turning point in my life.
So the rest of school years were uneventful, were they?
Pretty much uneventful. And I did what a lot of people did after school and went off to university, studied English literature at University in the Midlands, Birmingham, and was involved Christian Union and church and so on and so forth. And then I, after that, wanted to have I don't know, career might be too grand a word, but I wanted a job in sales, was really my business in that way. And I got a graduate sales job and did that for a year or more. And then a friend of mine, Jeremy Crossley, was planting a church in Pimlico in central London. And he said, why don't you come for 3 years and help do the worship? I play the guitar, and also to run Alpha. And I really wanted to be in London, and it sounded exciting. And I thought, well, I could do this for 3 years, and then I could then hopefully still get back into some kind of business. So I did that and enjoyed it, but I was absolutely sure that by the time that ended, I definitely wanted to go back into business if business would have had me. And so I applied for jobs. And I remember, I can remember sitting in an interview, being interviewed for a particular job. It was actually for a consultancy job, and I don't know whether I'd have got it or not. But I remember literally sitting in this interview thinking, there are thousands of people who could do this job, but I think I meant to do the church thing. And I'd never thought of that. It just hadn't been on my radar at all. I hadn't particularly got lots of friends who were thinking about that. It wasn't what the career service at school or university had suggested to me. But I just thought, there's something I meant to pursue. So I went back to Jeremy Crossley and asked him whether I could be an intern for a bit longer. And then I began a discernment process with the Church of England. And so it was a whole change round for me.
Funny, because I also did that discernment process with Jeremy, and after about our third time of chatting it through, where he was almost trying to coach me on disguising my enthusiasm for evangelism, to sort of play the game in terms of getting through the hoops. And he came back after, he went off to get a piece of paper, and he came back and said, "Simon, what are we doing? Every time I say anything about the Church of England, your eyes roll." and I was just released. It's funny, isn't it? It's interesting, isn't it? I just, you explore something, and then God can make it very clear just in one pronouncement, or someone who speaks truth into your life. And Jeremy was good at that, wasn't he?
Yeah, Jeremy's extraordinary because, and I wonder how many people on this podcast would have actually known his name. Probably, not hundreds and thousands, but the number of people that he pastored and he helped grow their faith, but also push them in a gentle, godly way into places of leadership. I mean, he was the one who gave me, if it's the right expression, he's the one who gave me my first sort of break. And I would never have done it if he hadn't have sort of nudged me and encouraged me to have a go. And it was funny going to college, theological college, because I had to go and retrain and do theology. I found myself I was at Wycliffe Hall in Oxford. And I found myself with quite a lot of people who'd sort of always known, or seemed to have always known, that they wanted to be a vicar. And I was not like that. I was sort of a bit reluctant and a bit fearful about the whole thing. So I think it takes all sorts, really.
And Sam's already in the picture by this stage.
Yeah, I met Sam at the church at St. James the Less. We met on Alpha. She was already a believer, but she came to help. And so we met there, and some of our best friends we met in our 20s in that church. It's been extraordinary for us.
So after Wycliffe, you were taken on staff at HTB?
I did a initial curacy in another diocese, in Guildford Diocese, for 3 years. Okay. And then Sandy Miller, who was the vicar of HTB at the time, he called me while I was doing my curacy, and he said, I didn't really know Sandy, but he knew my parents. And he said, what are you doing after you finish your curacy? And I said, well, I've got another 2 years to go, because it's 3 years you commit to. And he said, well, when you've done that, maybe we should have a phone call and see whether there's anything to explore at HTB. So I kind of remembered that. And sure enough, 2 years later, I remembered that as my curacy was coming to an end with this church, that I should have a look at this opportunity if there was one at HTB. So I rang Sandy Miller, and I thought I better not ring him exactly on 2 years to the day. He might sort of think I've been doing nothing else for 2 years. But of course, he remembered exactly. And I said to him, do you remember you said, maybe we should have a conversation to explore? He said, yes. And I went and met him at the vicarage at HTB. I didn't really know how to prepare. And he, so I think I printed out a CV or something, which he didn't even look at and just put on one side. And then we had a nice chat. And as I remember, the only question I think he asked me was, could you just remind me how old you are again? And we chatted. And then he said, have you got anything you want to ask me? And I said, well, if I was to come to HTB as a clergy person, do you have any sense of what I might do? And he said, well, we have Sunday services. I hope you'll come along to those. And the Connect group, maybe you could run one of those. But then he really looked at me and he said, but I hope you'll do anything that I ask you to do. And I was thinking about that because I'm not sure one could quite sort of do that now. Everybody needs sort of job roles and job descriptions, and everybody wants such clarity about the next step of their calling. But actually, it was very releasing and very refreshing. The best advice I was given when I left college was from an elderly clergy person who said, whenever you go and serve somewhere, just think of yourself like a missionary. You're going to be there as long or short as God calls you. You're going to give your life to it and serve wherever you can. And so we went to HTB, and the idea was to go for just 6 months or a year, and then to plant from HTB, maybe somewhere within London. That's really why we went. We had a heart, I think, for church planting. But after we'd been there 6 months, Sandy, Julie sent me and Sam off to have a look at a potential church in East London to plant into. And when we went to look at this church, Sam burst into tears, and I think we had 2 little children. We just couldn't quite get our heads around it. But I was thinking it's quite hard to say no if that's why we'd been asked to come to HTB in the first place. What were we going to say to Sandy? And then Nicky Gumbel saved the day, because it was just then that the transition between Sandy and Nicky was beginning to take place. And Nicky said to Sandy, look, if I do take over, would it be okay if Archie stayed for a bit longer? And so we ended up staying 6 years, and I was Nicky's associate. And then we did plant to Brighton, but that was a few years later.
Just back to your interview with him. It's interesting, isn't it? I'm a big fan of good to great, and so those key principles that come out of number crunching the best organizations that have outperformed the market 3 times for 15 years, so longevity and fruitfulness. And one of his key conclusions was that it doesn't really matter where you're going, so long as you get the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus. And what I've seen in our work in Africa is, if you just get a great team of people together, then and you're seeking God in humility, then he can do whatever he wants with us. But there's if you in a sense, if someone is mediocre, the ceiling of performance is mediocrity. But if you've got the chance to get behind wonderfully gifted people, as is absolutely my privilege in Central Africa, is that the sky's the limit. Once we believe in a supernatural God, we submit to his calling. So I can see that he just wanted you. He saw potential in you, and he was going to fit you in, and was trusting the Lord for that. And that's clearly what's happened. Did you learn much under Nicky in 6 years? Share some of those
goodness,
lessons.
did I? I learned so much. The thing was a few things, but I guess first of all is the can-do attitude. And that's probably what I noticed actually at HTB and with Sandy. There was a sense that all things with God are possible. That you can believe big because we have a big God. And, the question isn't it's kind of why shouldn't we? Let's have a go. And so I think that. Secondly, huge amount of laughter and fun. Nicky has this phrase, which I think he says it was his mother-in-law. Everything matters, but nothing matters terribly. How do you live with taking God seriously, but you're not yourself not too seriously? And so there was for all the things that there were to do, there was also a lot of fun with it. So I think those are probably the main things. And also, to see the church, and this is probably what I went with when I planted, to see the church as a mission station. Because in London, you're always going to find a few thousand people who are into this kind of thing. But we're trying to reach people who don't know Jesus. And so to almost turn it around and think, okay, we run Alpha or an evangelistic outreach mission, and we care for the poor. And then there's a church that grows off the back of it, rather than we're a kind of club for Christians. And then hopefully some people are brave enough to reach out. It's sort of that way of thinking I think I was immensely attracted to.
And go on, just give a few stories maybe for those 6 years where you saw the Lord do beautiful works of grace.
Well, we saw extraordinary growth at that time with Alpha, and still do, which we can come back to. But I think it's an amazing thing when there's a tipping point with Alpha where people begin to come because they've had more than one person suggest it. Once you get to a stage where you're not the only Christian or the only person who's tried Alpha in your office or in your family, And so then you're inviting people who've already heard that, oh, someone else mentioned Alpha to me. Maybe God's trying to tell me something. And so this amazing sort of invitational culture and confidence that was in the church then. And there was one particular person, his name's Jonathan, he's a great friend of mine now. He came and was part of the Alpha group that I was hosting. And he became a Christian. And I remember after the Alpha weekend where he gave his life to the Lord and was filled with the Spirit, I remember asking him the following Wednesday when we got together for Alpha, whether he noticed any difference. And he said, in these first 3 days of becoming a Christian, the phrase he used was, I find myself strangely attracted to being good. And he said, I found myself suddenly like wanting to be kinder or stopping when I went past someone who was homeless on the streets in a way that I would never have done before. And that sort of change that the Holy Spirit was bringing about. And he's a friend of mine now, 25 years on. And I've seen how God sort of raised up his children now in the faith.
Beautiful.
And they're doing and involved with little Alpha courses where they live. And I just love how one person's life changes and it sets off this whole chain reaction.
Generationally. Beautiful. So the time came to move on. Was it clear what that should look like?
No, we weren't looking to move from HTB or London. We loved it there. Up to that point, HTB had only been planting within London, had been doing that for about 15 years. The kind of model is to have in a local area a bishop who has a redundant building or a congregation that is struggling to find a priest, and then to invite HTB to send a priest, a leader, with a group of people to see whether they can refresh and keep the building open and reinvigorate. And only up to that point it would be in London. But then this building emerged in Brighton, right in the centre. It's known as the Cathedral of Brighton, St. Peter's. And the bishop asked whether we would have a look at that. HTB would have a look at that. And I only went because they asked Nikki, and I always used to meet with Nikki. And one week, Nikki said, I can't meet on Monday because I've got to go down to Brighton to see this church. Oh, why don't you come with me? And we can have our meeting on the train. So we went down, walked around this building, and then we met with the bishop. And I was really just there as an assistant. I wasn't sort of there to explore it or say anything. But when I got home, I found these words literally coming out of my mouth to Sam. I said, I wouldn't completely rule out Brighton. And it was like, I hadn't thought about planting. I hadn't thought about Brighton. I just found myself saying it. And she leapt on it, partly because she loved London and HTB, but she was from Brighton. It's her home. Right. And she'd always thought, she knew this building. She'd always thought there was an opportunity. And so I mentioned that to Nikki. And then one thing, it was about 18 months in the planning. But in 2009, we left HTB. We took a group of 30. And that included probably about 4 families with children and a few others. And they were people who were looking maybe to move out of London anyway and wanted a project as well. And so we moved there and we took over this building that had no heating, no lighting. And it was a wreck. It was, no wonder the Church of England were thinking of closing it because it had and still has actually a multi-million-pound building project on it. But it's a prize worth fighting for because, as a local clergy person said to me, the trouble with the Church of England and the church in Brighton is that this particular building, this one called St. Peter's, is like a visible sign to the whole city. Everybody knows it. And so if it's falling down, everybody assumes the game's up for the church. It's no longer relevant. God is dead. But if you could get it going and if you could get it full with people and the building done up, it would send the opposite signal that, God is alive, the church is alive, people are coming. And I was really captivated by that vision. And Nikki used to say, I think it was quoting an archdeacon in London, empty churches are like palaces of a long forgotten king. And so I think that stimulates for us planting. How can we take these amazing buildings that have in the past been full and are often in very strategic, geographical, visible locations and fill them with new life? But it was quite a task because I'm the least practical person in the world. I remember feeling totally overwhelmed. But God amazingly brought us practical people. And I think it was like it's almost like a metaphor for God rebuilding the walls. He rebuilt the church bit by bit by bit. To begin with, people came in with hot water bottles, and we gave them blankets, sometimes hard hats, so that we could meet. And we but what it did was it grew people who wanted to participate in a mission. You wouldn't choose St. Peter's if you wanted just to come and consume, because we weren't at that place. It drew people who had that get up and go and vision. So it was a pioneering place to be, and it was wonderful.
Love it. And there are key people along the journey, aren't there? So tell us about Mel.
Yeah, so in the first week we were there, I was called by the local social services and the police to come down to the church. I was in the vicarage at the time, because they'd found a body on the steps of the church. And it transpired that this woman's name was Mel. She was 24 years old, and she was quite well known in the street community. And she had taken an overdose of heroin. And the church obviously was sort of closed at that time. And I think that something went off in my heart and Sam's heart. And we thought, never again will the doors of the church be closed to people like Mel. And we talked to her family, got in touch because they wanted to know the situation with how she died and how she came to be on the steps of the church. There were a lot of drug users around the church at that time. It was where a lot of the street community gathered. And we offered to have a little Thanksgiving service for Mel in the church. And so about a week or two later, we had a few from the street community, her friends, her key workers, and a few members of her family. There are about 40 people altogether, 20 from our own church community and about 20 of hers. And it was the most beautiful, informal little service in a kind of side part of the church that was able to be open at that time. And then afterwards, we went into the hall. And I remember somebody had made cupcakes, and each one had the letter M on them for Mel. And then after our guests had gone, we sat around and we'd cleared up, and we just asked the question, what should we do next? Rather than waiting for another Mel, what shall we do? And we hadn't gone to Brighton with a plan to reach the homeless or the street community or be a place necessarily for the recovery community, but that's really what ignited it. And so we began shortly after a meal, which we did every Saturday evening. And it was a community meal. It wasn't like a soup kitchen where we were distributing food to homeless or street community. We decided that as a church community, we would sit down together. And so we had, it sounds little, but it was actually quite significant. We had proper plates and proper cutlery and proper china mugs and really good handmade food. And we opened the doors and anybody could come in the community. It was mainly the street community or homeless, but also the key thing was it was us as well. So it was a church community meal, and it started with a very few and then grew to about 100 visitors, community, and about the same number of us. And it was remarkable. And then after we'd done it for a little while, we noticed about a third of the people who came were women, and about 2/3 were men. And we had conversations with the women, or at least Sam did, and they said, we're a little afraid to come because some of the men here we don't always feel completely safe with. And Sam said to them, what would you really like? And they said, well, can you give a safe place just for us? So Sam started what we called Safe Haven Women. And on a Thursday afternoon, she would arrange to have, people's nails polished, feet washed, craft, arts, tea together, and open the doors. And to her surprise, nobody came to begin with. All the team were ready. Everything was set out. The women themselves had said this is what they wanted, but they didn't come in. So she went outside the walls of the church to find them. And they said, we don't dare come in, not because we don't like the church, but because we're scared of what the men will say. And so then we thought, well, what about if we did something for men as well? And they said, well, that might solve it. So then we did a Safe Haven Men. They didn't want their nails polished or feet washed. What they wanted was to play guitars or drums and play kind of different kind of games. So we used to do, then it was Saturday night, the meal with everybody. And then we did Wednesday with the men and Thursday with the women. And as it grew, more people came. And then we added a little, I suppose we could call it a little healing service, just a little reflection for 10 minutes, quarter of an hour at the end of the meal, where we would offer to pray for people, and many of them asked for that. And then they began bit by bit to feel confident enough maybe to come on a Sunday or along to Alpha, but it is a beautiful thing which emerged.
Hey folks, I'm really excited. I want to invite you to our second Inspired Live event. It's going to be the great Jonathan Aitken, who went to prison for perjury, having been a cabinet minister, and also the wonderful Shane Taylor, who stabbed a guy in the head, was one of England's most dangerous prisoners. And both of them, through their shared experience of prison and Alpha, coming into an amazing transformational relationship with Jesus. Listen, it's going to be a superb evening. It's on Sunday, October the 12th, at 6 p.m. in Bath Forum. And we'd love to have you there. If you want to sign up for that, that's greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired live. October the 12th, Sunday evening, 6 p.m., just for 90 minutes. Cracking interview, lots of laughs, as well as then out of that launching Alpha courses and all sorts. So please do sign up. greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired live, October the 12th. See you there. Now let's get back to the podcast. Was it Elisha? Was that from that context?
Elisha. Well, there's a woman called Elisha that came. Elisha was somebody we'd met actually physically on the streets, and she was, again, quite well known in the local area. And when we met her, I should think she was probably late 40s. And she said that for half her life, she'd been in jail. Not like in one sentence, but in different sentences. She was an addict as well. And she had got into, after quite a few cycles of this, had got into rehab, which had worked. And she'd been off drugs for quite some time, a matter of months. She'd never got this far before in her recovery. But of course, the problem, and you may know this, the problem is that when you move from your rehab into what they call a move-on house that the local authorities, the social services give, you're often back into your former community, and the temptations are so wild. And she said, I really, really want to be clean this time, but I think I'm going to struggle if I'm back with all the people from... and so we said, well, come and live with us in the vicarage. And she had recently started doing Alpha, was exploring faith. And we knew her and loved her. And she came. We didn't know how long she would stay for, or whether she would cope with us and our family, or what it would be like. But she ended up being with us for 3 years and became part of our family. She had the most miraculous conversion. And why I say that was that she gave her life to Christ. But in doing so, God was so kind, because she found herself with her former desire for drugs completely removed. She just said, I just don't. And whereas I think others, I don't know why the Lord does this. We battle that temptation for all our lives. Part of the sanctification process. For her, the Lord just completely took it away. and she didn't even want to smoke. It was absolutely extraordinary. And they came. We had a night shelter for the homeless, and it was a beautiful thing because she became the manager of that.
Yes.
And then now she's been into helping with the chaplaincy in the prisons and so forth. And I just love those stories of redemption. And you sometimes hear, and maybe I've been guilty of this. You put some people up on a platform to say their testimony, but it's often the most powerful testimonies at the moment are quite recent ones. Baptisms of people who've come to faith in the last few weeks. But having Alicia's story that is now, we're talking more than 10 years ago. And her growing and growing and growing. And she was completely estranged from her family. She'd had different children with different partners. And they're all now back in her life. She goes on holiday with them. She knows her grandchildren. It really is an amazing story.
Wonderful. It's always so good when you go to projects and the people who are running it have got the same life experience, which just gives hope to those people they're serving, reaching out to, doesn't it? Tremendous. Okay, tell us about James.
Well, we started Alpha as soon as we got to Brighton. I thought that, rather than... Seems to me that that if God's asking you to plant a church, it must be because he's got people that he wants to reach right away. And whereas sometimes I think what people do is they think, okay, we'll start with a Sunday and hope that people come. We thought, no, we're going to start with Alpha and grow the church, if you like, outside in. And we actually began at the very start of November. And if you know Alpha, it's sort of meant to be 10 weeks. But obviously, before Christmas, we only had 4 or 5 weeks. So I thought, okay, let's do a 4 or 5 week Alpha course. So we took a table in the cafe, which was opposite the church. And the very first Sunday, I said to the church, whoever was there, wasn't very many people, we're going to start Alpha on Wednesday. I'll be there. And then we waited. I got one other person to help me, and we waited. And one person came, but that person wasn't a Christian. And it was amazing because we'd had to, in order to advertise Alpha, we'd had to kind of borrow stories and testimonies from HTB. We'd sort of bust them down, but we wanted our own story. And God was so good. And this young man, James, came and did Alpha. And then when we got to the week, I think it was the second term, he did it again, but this time the whole course. And when we got to the week on healing, I had a word of knowledge for somebody who'd had eczema on their hands and that they had it as a child and then it had recently come back. It was quite a specific word. And after the talk in the small group, James said, that's me. I used to have eczema and it's just recently come back. And he wasn't a believer at that time. He'd been quite skeptical. Very open, but skeptical. And we prayed for him. And in the moment, nothing particular happened. But he said that next morning when he was taking a shower, he looked down and he realized all the eczema had gone and God had healed him. And he came to faith. It's a real... it reminds me so much of how it works in the Gospels and in Acts, doesn't it? How signs and wonders are so connected with evangelism, because that was God's way of reaching him. He gave his life to Christ and did an internship at the church. He was a young guy. Then he became a youth pastor, and he's now ordained in the Church of England. But it was that first Alpha course. And I'm so glad we ran it, because I was wondering whether we should wait until we had a bit more people, a bigger sort of critical mass. But we did it for one, and that one God touched.
Yes. Oh, well, stories are encouraging. People out there who are doing an Alpha course and you haven't got great numbers, it doesn't matter. Just go for it. And the Lord honours those who honour him, and when God's word goes out, we know God his promise. It will never return void without accomplishing what he's ordained for it to do. So you are a church plant, but quite quickly you want to be multiplying. How did that journey happen?
It was interesting because I think church planting was part of our DNA, I suppose, as you could say. We ourselves and the group who'd gone with us from London were those pioneering planting types. But nothing, emerged to start with. We didn't go down with frankly, we were so consumed with just trying to keep our building watertight and fixed up and open and people coming. And we only plant churches through invitation by the bishop and by the local church. So it's not like we sort of force our way in. So, but I do remember every time I saw the bishop, as the Bishop of Chichester, who's our local bishop, who's a great friend and such a supporter, I remember every time I saw him, whether it be at the cathedral or some diocesan event or something, I always used to say to him at the end, Bishop, if there's anything that you ever think of that you think I might be able to help with, you will let me know, won't you? And then after we'd been there, it was 4 years, he got in touch with me and he said, Archie, every time I see you, you always say, Bishop, if there's anything I can help with, you will let me know, won't you? I said, yeah. He said, there's a church in Whitehawk, which is one of the estates in Brighton, and it's quite an impoverished part of Brighton. He said, a priest has retired there after 30 years, and I can't find anyone to go. Would you go and lead that? And I said, well, Bishop, I'll do anything, but I'm leading this one. But maybe there's a way. Maybe we can put a community to live in the vicarage and I could somehow oversee it, but then we could run it through a group of people in community there. He said, that sounds great. So we did that, and it was an exciting thing. What was interesting to me was that the planting group who went was some of the same people who'd planted with us from London. It was so obviously in their culture, their pioneering spirit. And then after we'd done that, I got a call from the bishop the next year in 2014 saying, Archie, you remember whenever I see you, you always say, if there's anything I can help with, Bishop, you will let me know, won't you? I said, yes. He said, well, there's a church in Hastings, which is about an hour down the coast. And the priest is retired and we can't find a priest to go and do that. Do you think you could go and do that? I said, well, I'm not sure because I'm doing this one in Brighton, but maybe we could find somebody. And so actually I had a friend who was just coming to the end of his curacy, and we talked to him and he said, yes, I'll plant with you in Hastings. So he came to St. Peter's for a year with his family, and then we sent a group out there. And it was an amazing thing because, humanly speaking, people don't tend to move from Brighton. Because Brighton is, once you find Brighton, no one wants to move from Brighton. It's a wonderful city, and not to Hastings. But it's obviously the Spirit of God, just people relocated their homes down the coast to go to Hastings to start this new work.
Was that Simon and Sarah Larkin?
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I was preaching there a few months ago, and they've done a great work, and it's taken off, and they've got a fantastic team. Yeah. Shout out to the Larkins. Keep it up.
It is amazing. And so that's really how the conversations happened. And we had to pinch ourselves because then opportunities came up again, the same kind of conversations in Crawley, Bognor Regis, and then another diocese, Portsmouth Diocese. And we planted a little church to Harbour Church in Portsmouth. And I like that because they then planted a little bit, including one to Cardiff.
Yes.
And so I thought, wow, that's amazing. We've planted into a capital city, indirectly, or the Lord has. So we did that. And then there are also a number, like a family of churches within Brighton and Hove itself. But there was a strange kind of, I often think this is how the Spirit works. There was a kind of ease about it. I don't mean the church planting was easy. What I mean is I decided I wouldn't go kind of trying to bash doors down, but I simply said to the Lord, look, if a door is ajar, I'll always try and walk through it. But you'll need to give me the opportunities. And I found that was a good way to be. Because actually, if you were looking just very strategically about church planting where we were in Brighton, you might think, the obvious places to go would be, there's Eastbourne, there's Worthing. And those doors never opened for us for very good reasons. but the ones that did were other places. And so I often think how God is, he's opportunistic as much as strategic, isn't he? But it turns out to be strategic.
Yeah.
Bethlehem probably wasn't a very strategic place to be born, but of course it it was. And I think just putting it all in God's hands and praying, and then just keeping one's ears open and eyes open, and he leads us. And I think that's how he's always. My father gave me this advice when I was young. If someone asks you to do something, always try and say yes, unless there's a very good reason to say no.
Yeah.
And of course, there often is a very good reason to say no. But I think what he was saying to me was, try and live in a kind of front-footed, expectant,
Absolutely.
positive way. And then you trust the Lord to open and shut doors. And that bit of advice has served me really well.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Dirk. I'm a political consultant and a pastor of a church. This does what it says on the tin. It's an absolute lightning bolt of hope into my week. I look forward to it every week, and I listen to it when I'm doing gardening, driving the car. I send it to lots of friends where I think it would be a blessing or instructive or a witness. I take it as inspiration for preaching and teaching. It is superb.
So wonderful seeing that, the can do, the saying yes. So Nikki would have got that from Sandy from Collins before, then he passed it on to you. It is a DNA attitude sort of stance, isn't it? Saying, yes, we can do this, not because we're amazing, but because we believe in an amazing God, the God of the immeasurably more than what we can ask or imagine. And he's done that. He's done that through the HTB network. He's done that through you guys down in Brighton, multiplying it. I just find it so encouraging. And I know people listening will find it encouraging, because a lot of listeners, we've got tough gigs, we're on tough patches, and we're struggling. But that's why I wanted to get you on in no small measure, Archie, to share these stories. And now you find yourself back at HTB, back at the mothership. Was that a crystal clear calling?
It was, actually, but it was an unexpected calling, in the sense that we had a phone call from Nikki to say, come and see Pippa and I. We'd love to chat. Honestly, we had no idea what it was about. We weren't aware that Nikki was looking to step down as vicar of HTB. In the Church of England, you have to step down before you're 70, but he was a few years off that. But he'd obviously felt that it was time. He wanted to concentrate on Alpha, and he wanted to pass on the church. And so he said, we think we'd love you to do it. And we immediately said no. And said, there was nothing about our lives in Brighton that we didn't love and felt called to. And we'd been at HTB, so we knew a little bit of what a gig it is. And he said, well, go and think about it. So this was a conversation that I remember in September 2021 or something. And I said, well, look, I will at least pray about it. And I'll give you an answer by October. We gave ourselves 6 weeks. We went back down to Brighton, and I think what happened was that once we realised that, kind of humanly speaking, we didn't have to do this. And I know Nikki, he could be quite persuasive, but no one's got a gun to our head. We didn't have to do it. We could say no. Then I think after that, we almost became open. Well, okay, Lord, now that we can say no, what are you asking us to do? And actually, interestingly, in terms of our guidance, because we couldn't talk to too many people, because it was, I think, understandably, HTB didn't want the word to go out that Nikki was sort of going to be stepping down until they had a kind of plan. But we did talk to our children. And it was really interesting. Our children, each of them, they were aged between about 20 and 14 at the time. And we got 4 of them. And we actually ended up having separate conversations with each of them, just saying, we don't know what to do. And each of them said, in their different way, we think you should do. And I remember one of them said to us, we love living here. We live near the seaside. We live opposite the park. But he said, we don't really go as a whole family so much to the seaside or the park now, because we are growing up and we've got our own friends and we do our own thing. And, you've got to grow up and do your own thing and do the next stage of what God's asking you to do. And I think that was very releasing for us. And so we went back and said, yes, we would like to explore it. And obviously there was a whole discernment and interview process. But we were in that perfect way of being nervous but called. And I'm really glad we felt called, because sometimes when jobs are hard, like they all are, aren't they, from time to time, you want to know that you can look back in your journal and that you're doing it not because it seemed a good idea at the time or because somebody that you like asked you, but the Lord asked us. And we really, really know that. And I think we're seeing the fruit of that as well.
Yeah. HTB's got very precious memories for me, because Nikki asked me to speak there. I can remember clearly, it was January the 4th, 2016. And the following morning, I was flying back with my wife and 3 kids to Burundi, and just about all bar one of our key leaders, faith-filled leaders in a war zone, had said, "Don't you dare come back, it's too dangerous." And yet we had sought the Lord, and we had fasted and prayed. And actually the day we started, a week set aside to pray with my wife, that day 163 people were killed in the capital in broad daylight. It was the most fear-filled day in Burundi since the 1993 genocide. It was so scary. And that was when we were praying for peace about whether we should go back. And we both sensed a peace to return. And on the last, just before I had to give a definitive yes or no, I had said, "Lord, I'm going for a last prayer walk on Southampton Common. And this is the heaviest decision as a husband or father I've ever had to make. If anything goes wrong, no one will forgive me. I'll have to live with it for the rest of my life if Lizzie gets raped or the kids get killed or whatever. And I just love it if in your grace you gave me a sign. You don't have to, but I'd love a real clarity on this." And so I went for a last walk on Southampton Common. I was walking along this path, and another guy's walking along a different path, and our paths merged at the exact same moment. And that guy had been a missionary in Pakistan. He'd had death threats like I had death threats. He had child kidnap issues. He had all the things that I was wrestling with. And I was like, God, within a 500-mile radius, you could not have handpicked one man with the same life experience to be on that path at that exact same moment to speak faith into me. And so as I stood at HTB, and actually I think I preached 9 times that day. Is it right that you preach and then you get ferried to the next church and the next church?
My bicycle and go to the next.
Oh my goodness, that was an exhausting day. But I preached in that sort of trepidation of imminent return, but actually alongside the trepidation, the gospel confidence that actually, God's in control. He's got big hands. And we went back, and well, I'm still here. So but I would see people, and often fear stops us from embracing God's adventures for us. And it was so important to go back. I'd meet people. I remember meeting on the bank saying, "You're here. No one else has come back. Everyone's left." And so that's why I was back in HB a couple months ago. We had the Albert Hall Leadership Conference, which is fantastic, but it's very precious to me because I think back to that moment of God speaking incredibly clearly. So you're there now. Goodness me, there's so many plates you're spinning and balls you're juggling. Go on, just tell us what's going on and some glory stories.
Oh, it's a wonderful job, and there's so many parts that sometimes feel like there's a danger. Actually, you could feel a bit like you're a CEO of an organization, but really I'm a pastor, teacher at heart, and I love doing ministry. I always help host a Alpha small group. My favorite times on Sundays are praying for people in the ministry of the power of the Holy Spirit. And actually, I had a lovely moment a few weeks ago. I was preaching, and then I went out into the car park, because I often go out there just to say hi to people who are around. And somebody who came up to me, his name was Andrew, and he said, you had a word, because I'd had a word of knowledge about somebody who'd had a pain in their right side. He said, "I heard that. I was downstairs because we have an overflow." I said, "Oh, were you in the overflow?" He said, No, I was working the cameras because we have a live stream." And he was switching cameras downstairs in our technical office, our studio. And he said, "I couldn't get up for prayer because I'm volunteering today on the cameras, but will you pray for me? And I prayed for him. And I normally, when I pray for healing, I normally ask, how long have you had this condition? And he said, I've had this for 15 years. I've been to doctors. I've been advised physiotherapy. And nothing. I said, well, of course I'll pray. And I prayed really quite briefly because both he and I had to get back in to do our serving for the next service. And amazingly, he came up to me a week later and said, next morning, I got out of bed. He said, normally it's a real struggle because I'm so stiff in the morning, my back, to get up. And I found myself, I could move with ease. And then I found that I had a job to do at home, which was to put some big iron gates on the end of our garden path. And again, that would be something that would pretty much be beyond me. But I found myself able to pick this thing up. It's so heavy, and I didn't have pain. And then he said, forever when I've been to a physio, they've said the thing you need to do is to strengthen your core. And they give me these exercises to do, things like sit-ups and stuff. But he says, I can't do them because it's so painful. But I thought, right, I'm going to try. And I could just do these push-ups with no pain. And he'd been completely healed. And I just saw such a beautiful story. And we're seeing lots of churches, Simon, people coming at the moment and exploring faith, trying Alpha and healing. And what we're seeing is, I think, in line with what other churches are finding, is we're seeing particularly young men coming and trying church for the first time. I was with somebody on Sunday that, again, I had the privilege of praying with just 2 days ago. And he came up to me in the ministry time at the end of the service and asked me to pray. And I prayed. And he started weeping. And he said to me, why am I crying? I said, well, it might be partly emotional, but I think it's also the Holy Spirit. He said, but I never cry. He said, this must be God. And then he said to me, how do can I have this again? It's so beautiful in the questions. And then there was a guy who said, I've literally never been in church. I said, what, never? He said, no, never been in church. I mean, he's like 25. He said, I'm in London for the weekend. And yesterday afternoon, Saturday, I just felt like I wanted to go to church. I don't know why. So I Googled 3 churches and this one came up. So I thought I'd try it. He said, but I feel really, really drawn to it, but I'm also a bit nervous because I don't know what I'm getting myself into. And I love just meeting people like that, and someone like that I can then sort of meet up with in the week and sit on a bench in the park and chat through questions and invite to Alpha. So, amidst everything of sort of organisationally, I think it's the times of ministry that are particularly special.
Yeah. Wonderful. It is just a hungry season. Last week I had the chance to lead a lovely 23-year-old Jake to the Lord, and there's just an openness right now, isn't there?
There really is.
So it's wonderful.
Yeah, there really is.
So we're coming to the end. We've got other stuff. HTB, you got your 4 pillars.
Yeah, I think. I mean, when I think about church, maybe it's naive, but I think of, as I said earlier, as mission stations. I think it's about evangelism and care for the poor. Those are the key things, the pillars, I guess. And within that, which we call sort of care for the poor, I suppose to broaden that would be kind of social transformation we sometimes talk about, and prisons, going into the prisons with Alpha and Sundays, caring for prison leavers when they come out and helping them integrate into society and into church life, but also the homeless and displaced people. So lots of asylum seekers, refugees are around, particularly in our Earl's Court site. And then actually, interestingly, Sam started going in, invited in by 2 of the strip clubs in East London as a chaplain. She felt she had a word of knowledge and a prophetic word given to her about, well, actually, she said at the time she wasn't best pleased because there was a picture of her being a bat. She didn't think was very attractive, but actually I think it was being someone who comes alive at night. And right. So she was prayer walking around, and this openings come up where the manager of the strip clubs wants somebody in as a kind of well-being chaplain for all the women who work there. And so Sam goes in with a little team. They're careful actually not to proselytize, but they have conversations, and especially while the girls are getting ready at the beginning of the evening, and some amazing conversations from there. I think what I love is I do like running a church, but I've never felt particularly called to running a church. I feel called to reach cities and be a mission. And those are the things I love doing. So as long as we're pioneering and reaching out, and of course the local church is the best place for that.
Yeah. Have you got any stats on the top of your head in terms of the number of churches planted through the network?
Well, there's 180 that have been planted through the HTB network. So that's not all directly from HTB, but maybe plants of plants. So even if you take, for example, the ones from Brighton, that would account for maybe 15 of those altogether. And typically what's happening now is what we might call second generation plants. So plants have gone into city centres, maybe often university towns, and then they're beginning to plant in their local areas. And that's happening and has been happening all over the UK. But a half of those plants now are from kind of areas of much more challenging socioeconomic conditions. And I think that's really exciting. And then we all get together at Focus, which is at the end of July, for a long weekend. And we gather as a whole network, a family of church. We talk about being a family on a mission. And we all gather together to be inspired and refreshed and refilled with the Spirit, and out we go again.
Wonderful. Well, listen, Archie, we're just cheering you on the whole network, loving the influence it's having on the body across this nation and to the nations as well. So give us a parting word of encouragement and challenge, if you like.
Well, I keep coming back to Luke 10 and the harvest is plentiful, the workers are few. I think there's an extraordinary window that's opened up, an opportunity. I think there's also an urgency. And it's funny, for 25 years in ministry, my predominant question sort of been, how can I kind of get more people into church? How can I attract people into church? And suddenly, do you know what? That's not the issue. We've got dozens, hundreds of people actually across the network and in our churches, not just our network, who are wanting to come to church. The problem is we haven't got the containers to catch them. One of our congregations here, two of the young people who are app developers, they've created an app that helps link new people who come into the church with a connect group. But all it's done is reveal that there's currently 150 in that service alone who are waiting to be connected and put into a discipleship group. And we haven't got anything like the number of connect group leaders, alpha hosts, people to do deliverance ministry, ordained ministers, that I think that God's bringing something. And so I think it is, the harvest is plentiful, the workers are few. So I think the task before us is to everybody to think, right, how can I mobilize? What part do I play? Be some kind of, I think of the 2 Kings 4, Elisha and the woman with the jars. What's the jar that I can put out for Jesus so that he can fill it?
Well, I'm leaving a pause there, guys, because I want us to sit in that challenge, because please bring your jar. Lord, I want to bring my jar, and we want it to be filled. We want to bring in loads of jars so there's enough oil for everybody. And so, yes, I spoke to a friend of mine a couple of years back, and he said that, so the stats won't be exactly right now, but he said that, and this is before this quiet revival, if you like, this burst of growth that we're experiencing right now. But he said that there are 50,000 people on the waiting list for Scouts. So kids that want to go to Scouts. We don't think people want to come to youth groups. He said people do want to go to youth groups, but the reason why there's that waiting list is that they haven't got enough leaders. to take care of the kids. And I think in no small part, that's because a lot of us, we're at home binge watching box sets of whatever latest series. And that is not the best use of time. And, we've got the best message in the world, and sitting in front of the TV is not the best stewardship of what God's entrusted to us. So come on, folks. I hope that, as Archie shared, I'm just encouraged because I love what the Lord's doing through the network, and I know so many of those involved, and it's just wonderful. And it's not isolated. The other church streams are experiencing growth as well, and we cheer everyone on. We want to be, as Archie said, on the front foot. Let's not be on the back foot. Let's not be defensive. Let's move to the front foot. Gospel confident. We have got the best message in the world, and we bring that in humility. God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. But you can be confident with humility and share that message. And so, Archie Coates, thanks, brother, for your time. Keep going strong.
Thank you. It's wonderful to speak. Thank you very much, Simon.
Brilliant. Okay, folks, gossip this podcast to friends. If you want people to hear it, it'd be great. Give us a wonderful review on Spotify or iTunes. Next week, we've got a very different story, another fantastic guest. So I look forward to that. In the meantime, have a great week. I want to thank Adam Thomas Steer for the editing, Mike Sander for the mixing. God bless you, and toodaloo.